Hi everybody, welcome back. This is Instructor Philip Dimitriadis. So what we're going to do today, this is for the Advanced Digital Paint class. We're going to be talking about color and how color interacts with room. And what I did is I did this demo. I worked on these at home, and I wanted to show everybody how I created basically I took one render that I had, okay, and then I basically, with using different types of overlays and adjusting tints and shades. So remember, tint and shades are a white and black on top of a color, and then a color overlay is us throwing some type of a color variant on top of our local color that's maybe affecting the local color for the time of day. So what was really important when I did this is I like to think of the room as what the local color is without a light source, and then go in and add the light source in. And so there's a difference in light sources, okay? But you have a base local color for the room, and you can see down here how these local colors change depending on the time of day, because they're different tints and shades adding to part of that color, okay? So that's what helps me work in color. I'm not a color pro, I'll say that to you right now, but I do, when I get into it, I find it when I talk with friends and break things down and look at other artists of inspiration, it's a little bit easier for me to break things down into categories like this. For example, in this piece, the light's coming through the window. The light is more of a yellow. I get this haze effect. When I come over here, on this piece, I had to render it a little bit differently because my light is now coming from a light source up above. And since that light's coming down, it is already nighttime. I'm going to have more of a blue tint on the room because it's a nighttime piece, so I adjust my local colors accordingly. And then obviously here's my midnight piece with no light in the room, no light on and no light coming through the windows. So therefore all of my local colors are going to have like a bluish tint to them because they're being affected by the time of day. So when you think about it, this is one thing I can bring from Maya that might make sense, okay? In Maya, we have a sphere that we put over our environment, okay? In that sphere, when we render that, we can affect the model that we have based on the conditions of that sphere, the spherical lighting. So imagine if you have a cloudy day, so imagine if you have a kid's skateboard and a backpack sitting inside the Maya set, and it's a cloudy day, you're going to have lots of grays and lots of affecting colors that are going to affect the overall condition of that backpack. So inside the Maya set. So that's why I like to think of sets. I think after getting to work in Maya a little bit, it got me to this point of understanding, like, this is how I like to branch out and think how I construct my colors. So, like on this one, midday, I wanted just a light white haze, but I didn't want it super bright. I wanted shadows to end. I wanted there to be a white, like, fuzzy highlight coming through. On this one, I'm thinking, hey, it's a lot more grayer. Outside, I'm going to have clouds, right? I have this sort of grayed down room that's a little bit dull. So I don't know if you've ever been in these conditions of your own. For example, I take a look at the room I have upstairs, my room at home, and then I think about a cloudy day. We have a large window, and when that window is open, I get lots of gray affecting part because there's not as much light. So what I like to do is I like to think of these as tints and shades and overlays to adjust. So what I'm going to do really quick after showing you that piece that I had worked on is we're going to take a student piece right here. Okay. Now, pros and cons to this student piece is that some of the colors are really saturated in there, which isn't a bad thing. Okay, that's all right. But let's quickly take this piece and duplicate it, and without adding a light source in it, let's just think about other times of day that we might have, and then sometimes we can adjust part of that color really easily because it's just saturation. In fact, one of the things that I always like to do, that you guys have all heard me talk about whenever I'm dealing with color, is I take an image that has been done in color, okay, and hold on a minute, I didn't realize these weren't both fitting. Let me scale them down a little bit so I get them both to fit. So what I like to do is I like to take an image that is all color, and I always like to look at it in terms of it being a value set, okay. Actually, hold on a minute, I wanted to get these to fit perfectly fine. That's pretty good. Let me transform now, scale them both together. There we go. So what I can do is on Michelle's piece down here is I can go over to hue and saturation. I could drop all the saturation down, and look, it gives me a better idea of how her piece is working as a value set. okay, which is pretty cool to me because it answers a lot of questions. Because if things work properly in values, then I can make sure that they're working in color by going in and checking it. So a lot of times I like to be working in color. I cross back and change my piece, drop the saturation, or put a layer on top of it in Photoshop to see how the values are working. Okay, so what I'm going to do first here is I'm going to take Michelle's piece here, I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to bring it over here, and I'm going to think about, let's see, how can I make that more of a nighttime scene? So if it's nighttime and it's dull and we have more of a blue, what could I do? So let's try a couple different options. And everyone has a different working method, okay? A friend of mine will do this, where he'll just draw and take a blue, put a marquee over, he'll grab like a blue, and what he'll even do in his blue is he'll even do a little bit of a blue gradient like this, and he'll come over into a room and he'll just go like this and go boom. He'll throw a blue gradient going right on top of it. Let me make that a little bit lighter, like that, okay? He'll throw a blue gradient like that, then he'll come on over and he'll go into something like overlay, or he'll go into hard light, soft light. Actually, hard light worked pretty nicely there. Do you see that? So what I've done now is I've already set up part of Michelle's room on how it would look like if it was a nighttime scene. Okay, but I haven't got into any light yet, right? That would be my next phase. Okay, so all I've really done, if you think about it, is, let me do another version too. I'm going to duplicate this one, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it over here and show you another way without putting that something else, without putting the overlay on it. So let me blend these two together. So you use, oops. Actually, I notice it's a little short on the edge. Let me overlap that just a little bit there. Okay, so if I go to merge these two, it's not, what happens is it takes off that layer effect. So look at what happens. Since that layer is a hard light layer, one of the downsides of doing this is once you've taken a layer and you've indicated some type of change in the layer setting, when you go to blend the two together, that's the one, oh, that's why. Hold on, my bad. It should blend perfectly there. If I tried painting on top of that, I could have some weird effects with her, with the layer setting, because it's hard light, and if I have to paint on, I got all these weird layers. So I like to just merge them, paint from there. That would be the starter part of my night scene. Now, what I wanted to show you is, instead of doing the overlay, what if I went into color balance, okay, on this one here to the right, I'm going to go color balance. What if I thought, well, I just want to add blues to it right now and make it a nighttime scene? So what I need to think about is I would be affecting my midtones and my shadows. So if I come over to midtones and I start to put a little bit more blue in this way, and then I start to put the slider against that way, to see, it just adjusted it a little bit. Then I'm going to come over to shadows and see if I can't do the same thing. So if I start to dull this down and I start to change this, okay, now I can start to get pretty close maybe towards a little bit of a night scene. Might need a little bit more tweaking. I'm going to go back into color balance, because now my settings start back over from 0, okay? So I can now come back into shadows and go, hey, I want to get a little bit more darkness in here. I want to punch that a little bit. And the problem is that pink is sort of dominating a little bit. So I might come into hue and saturation. I might drop down a little bit more of that saturation, because it's a little desaturated without as much light in there, right? And then I might come back into color balance. So it takes me a little bit longer to try to get that scene to come back down to a night scene. You see that? And actually, one of the things I haven't addressed yet is I haven't addressed the highlights. I've only been changing the midtones and the shadows. And those highlights, which are these bright pinks in here, are staying super bright. So if I come into highlights and I put a little bit more blue into my highlights, you see what's starting to happen now? It starts to adjust the room a little bit. And if I go into levels and I darken up a little bit more, not that, excuse me, wrong way. I'm getting a little bit closer to that night scene, okay? So do you see how both of those could work for a night scene? But what's important is how you got there. So when you're painting, sometimes I don't have everything on one layer like this. Sometimes I have things set up differently. Sometimes I have only the mid layer. If I only have a mid layer inside my scene, I'm more likely to go adjust that separately in color balance for hue and saturation and levels independently, or like I did here, I could just throw that wash over it, okay? So let's come back here. This is our original, okay? I'm going to duplicate this piece here because I want to save it. Okay, I'm going to put that there on the bottom. So let's say in this piece, I'm going to zoom into this one. For Michelle's, I want to have light coming in from the outside, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw a couple layers on top here. I do the same thing that we did when we were working in tone. So I like to think of things as highs, okay? I'm going to put a shadow layer in here. Okay, the thing that's going to change now is part of the light in my room is going to be affected depending on the light source that's coming through part of my location. So right now, this room's pretty bright to me, which means it's not just the local color that's bright, but I think what I'm going to do is just darken my levels a little bit more like this. That way, I like to paint in highlights, okay? That feels something that's more, a little bit more has more workability to me, if that makes sense, right? I don't know if I could paint in highlights right there because it's already so bright, okay? So what I did is by darkening it now, turning off the one underneath, now I could come in and try to get light and shadows to sort of blend together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of make this a little bit smaller, and I'm going to come in here and I'm going to imagine, okay, I'm just going to start with the outside. So I'm going to come to the outside, I'm going to take a little bit of maybe a little bit lighter blue, and I want to get a little bit of a gradient that's happening in there. And actually I was thinking maybe I should get some clouds outside there because you have that nice blue, so I can throw a couple clouds in there, get a better feel of white sort of coming through here, okay? So give me a minute, let me just get in here, and working small like this, I'm going to try to come in here and just sort of rough paint a little bit of what I'm imagining in part of the scene, okay? It's still a little gloomy, so... Oh, you know what I just did? Oops. Hold on. I made a mistake. I'm painting on the wrong layer. My bad. Not paying any attention. Let me go back there and undo. Okay, that's all right. I made a mistake, but I'm just going to come back in and try to fix it here. Actually, I'm painting with the brush I don't like either. So I'm imagining it's a little bit more, get my color picker here. Still a little dark for me. I want to get a little bit more light coming through. Maybe as that light's coming through, part of that light's going to come over here. It's going to wrap down on part of the ground. It's going to hit around the stuff, let's say. Okay. So I'm thinking early morning, nice and bright, okay, and I'm going to come back and now I'm going to think about if light's pouring in through here. Okay, now I don't have much color on that yet. What I'm going to do in a minute is might go back in there and now think of it, if it's yellow or morning transition, it's going to have a little bit more yellow, more orange into it, right? Definitely the yellow in there. So I'm going to start with a little bit of white first. Try to get this to pop. And I'm basically trying to think about how this light condition is going to happen, I might even actually lighten up the room a little bit. Still feels a little gray. Okay. I'm trying to make it a little bit brighter as objects are a little bit closer to part of this. That light source, right? The morning light coming in there, that sort of haze building up. And then when that light hits here, I know that some of that light's going to spill off around the side, right? Michelle, the one problem you're going to have, might be a little harder, is your table and your bookshelves are so thin. It's hard to get like a little highlight line on there, but I think you'll be okay if you just get it a little. As that light spills through there, I'm going to have this pink is going to have some other highlights coming onto it from that light source, right? This is that hard spot, is getting a nice little crisp highlight. And part of that surface. So I'm just going through thinking very lightly how all my facades in this image are going to be hit by that light coming in the room. So I have the back of the chair. Okay, so remember we talk about bounce light. I have part of the carpet here. So I put that indication of light maybe hitting here. Okay, but then I also need to think about how the light's going to spread on a spectrum. Do you know what I mean by that? Light changes on a spectrum where it might be, like for example, white at its brightest. White at its pure brightest is like a dead white, and then it goes to like a yellow, and then that spectrum goes from a yellow to orange. So the spectrum in the morning is going to be white to yellow to orange. So as I get highlights that get a little bit closer, I want a little bit more white in them to yellow, and as they recede away, I want them to branch off a little bit more into orange. Okay, that's probably one of the hardest things to try to apply into your piece. Let me get the edge of that carpet. I'm going to have a little bit of an edge highlight here. I'm going to have a little bit where it starts to turn to green a little. What about the edge of that chair? Okay. So, but as I'm hitting that, I'm still in a yellow. So if I drop my cursor down a little bit more, see how I went to that orange? So now I can get some of that orange to fade in on the back here. Okay, and maybe some of this orange light, as the light's changing through the spectrum, is a little bit more orange in the back there. Okay, a little bit more over there. Okay, now I'm going to go back. Let's think about other little highlights in here, back here. All right. Light's going to come up here. So I almost have to think of this whole area in here too is going to be hit with light. Okay. So real quick, as I'm working on all this, on some of the highlights coming in there, okay, what I want to do is I'm going to go to shadows real quick. And I want to think about my shadows being a little bit more on the cooler side. Oops. Uh-oh, I didn't mean to change. That's not what I wanted. So really lightly, and I come in with a fuzzy brush and see what if I can punch up a little bit more of the shadows over here. What about up on the ceiling right there? Okay. What about back down? Where else would I have a gradient happening with a little bit of shadows? What about under the desk? It might be a little bit darker and it might gradate out from there. So I'm going to come down here very lightly and I'm just going to see if I can put a little bit more of a blue in the back here under part of the desk. One of the things that I like to do that I find the hardest is getting that gradient control of things changing color. So you have some shadows and blue areas, and then you have highlights coming in, so you have a changeover where the shadow's going for blue and then it's blending in with a little bit of a highlight, right? So even back here, I'm going to change my blue. I'm going to try to go a little bit richer now. Because this is getting a little bit further away. So I want to put a little bit more of a shadow on the back of that. What about in here on the sidewall? It's going to be a little bit darker. Okay. Definitely up here it's going to be a little darker. About the side of that chair. All right. Okay. So real quick, let me take a look at my shadows. I always like, just like I do when I'm working in tone, I want to look at my color comp right now, as if it was tone. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to call this a tone, OL, overlay. I'm going to fill it full of black. Let me make sure I have pure black. Okay, and then I'm going to drop this down to saturation so I can look at that to make sure my values are still reading pretty good. I think that's fine. Okay, so I did notice, now this is the thing I like about coming in, having some of my highs done. So that's, I feel like the room is a little too dark still. I don't know what it looks like up there, but for morning time, I still want to get some other highlights around there. So what I can do, and this is what's so great about Photoshop, is I can come in here with some of my highlights in my shadows, and I can go to color balance and see what happens. What if I take this right now, and what if I'm thinking, in part of my shadows, my midtones, I want to add a little bit more yellow in a part of my room. What happens if I do that? Does it make it a teeny bit warmer? Will it do anything? Actually, on this particular one, it's not doing anything. Let me see. So let's go back. Let's hit cancel. Let's do it again. Let's go to balance. This time, let's try shadows. If I come over to shadows and I put a little bit more light in there. Actually, the red, see what it did? Is a little bit more of the yellow and the red in there, changed it from blue and made it a little bit warmer. Okay, so that was just on my shadow layers. Look at the difference from before. Okay, there was a little bit more blue. Now I made it a little warmer. Okay, so that actually feels a little bit better to me. I still want to come in here. There's actually sort of that. The one thing I like about morning feels. That was hard. Let me merge these together. Okay, highs. There tends to have that feel like morning dust. You know what I'm saying? It's like a little bit of magic sparkle comes through part of a room. Wondering if I could come in here and grab like a light dust tool. See that little bit of that magic glow sort of coming through the window. I know it probably sounds stupid, but you see that in the morning, you know what I mean? And then I could take that and just punch up a little bit more bright yellow back there, a little bit more warmth back there. So look, and I put that, see that little bit, even if I want to, it's on another layer. And I could come in here, add that together. Okay, so I'm about 20 minutes into this, and I think that would be fine. Let's take a look at what the original was. Okay, there. So it's weird when you're building up on it, and then you come back and you're like, ah! It's super bright, but it's not a bad bright. It's all the local colors, but I didn't have to go in and really paint the local colors, did I? I just put a couple overlays, I tweaked them a little bit, and for me, my only concern on this for being morning is I feel like maybe on the shadows, I went a little bit dark. So that's easy for me to do because since I did it on another layer, almost I take it off, I'm almost like, hey, that's fine. But I know there's going to be some form of light bouncing, causing gradient control on those walls. So either I get in there and I paint a little bit more highlights going up the walls, which I can do, or that was why I did sort of the shadows. So let me tweak the shadows a little bit. Let me come back in, you know. Sometimes I just like to see what happens. What if I go dark? Nah, it's not really working. What if I go a little bit lighter? I get a little bit control on the gradient. What if I come back in to color balance? Go back in, let's look at the highlights. What if I get a little bit more yellow? That's getting a little bit too much yellow into the areas that I don't want. But what if just, you know, what if in part of my highlights here, I punch those up a little bit brighter? Oh, that's sort of cool. You know, what is that stupid tool that comes up? Okay. So what I like to do is my eyes get used to something after a while. And after 20 minutes, 30 minutes, especially with color, I don't want to mess with it anymore. The other thing I want to do is I want to blend that in a little bit. Where I put that, I can make it a little bit softer. So if I look at part of my highlights coming in here, you know, maybe I drop it down a little bit, you know. Actually, I like sort of the highlights the way they are. But I might fade this in a little bit over the rug. But as far as I'm concerned, for 20 minutes, I have enough information there for a comp that's pretty close to morning. Okay, so then I come over here. Let's go to this next one here. Let me just label these morning shadows. Oops. Okay, I'm going to label this morning highs. Okay. There we go. Let me just label this color. M-O. All right, then I can come back and tweak it a little bit later. So I have that one done, I'll sort of leave it the way that it is. Now let's come over here. This is the one that we just did. That's the one we adjusted. I'm going to come over to the one I did the little overlay on, which was right there. So I'm going to commit to these, and I'm just going to combine them like that, okay? In this one, however, I'm going to imagine that now there's a light on, okay? Now here's my question for Michelle, is there are different qualities of light. In fact, if you go to Home Depot, you can buy a cool light or a warm light. So what are you imagining that light be if this is more around the nighttime? Okay, so what I'm going to do, if I come over and look at my blues, I'm going to think of my cool light, brightest light at its brightest concentration would be a speck of white. But somewhere in this spectrum, and then maybe that light as it delineates out sort of drops down around sort of a curve like in this little genre right here. Okay, so I'm going to start over just with this, come over into the piece. I'm going to go for this little lantern that's right here. Okay, now I like to paint it in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that fuzzy brush. Let me label this correctly. I'm going to say night highs, and I'm going to put another layer and call it night shadows. Remember, my piece has no shadows in it, right? So that's stuff I have to add, but the shadows are going to be dictated based off of my light. So what I'm going to do is come in here. I have that light sort of blue. Let me see if I come in here and just sort of hit this pretty bright like that. Okay, and then I'm going to come in here and just sort of go boom. Now that's definitely a little bit more of a cool light. Now I can come in here with my eraser, and of course my dumbass put it in the shadows section. That's all right. This is what happens. When I work at home, I can concentrate, and I notice whenever I do a lecture at school, I get caught up in the, in what I'm doing in the lecture. So here, I'm going to come in here with my eraser. I'm going to erase most of this, like so. Erase around it like that. Okay, I'm going to come back here, erase that cast off there, and then the light especially, there's not going to be anything on that light. There. So I'm going to start with that, right? That's going to be the beginning of my light source. So immediately I can start looking. Now let's do this one. Maybe I do this more in a graphic content instead of painting. What if I select and paint? So there's my light. I need to think about, first of all, how far is my light going to cast? Now, I like one thing that Cliff Cramp used to talk about, and he used to mention that weak paintings show the light rays, which is a good point, meaning that if you're really good with light, you show the objects that are being hit by the light, and you adjust those. But there are a couple conditions when you're in like a forest or night or dusty area, or like in an attic, or like a big forest where you see light coming through trees, you pick up dust and other particles, and you get this little particle flare thing, or even morning, and then you get more light rays coming off. But for now, I know I'm going to have pretty much a base spread like this of light, of light coming down. So I'm going to come in here really softly. I'm just going to get a little bit more softer light coming through this part of here. And I think that's about as bright as I want to punch my light right now. Now, just to throw this at you, there are a couple occasions when light is casting, okay, that light, if those were little cutouts on top of there, it could go upward. Or if it didn't go upward, it could also bounce. If there's a little hole in the back, your light will shoot off the backside there. So in this part where the butterfly is, I didn't know if that was a cutout in the light where you see like the little, my daughter has that in her room on something. It's just like a sticker or something on it, which is totally fine. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I have that as a really light blue. I'm going to come in here. Okay, I'm going to put that as my natural light on the top. I still notice there's a couple areas here that haven't quite erased. So I'm going to get these areas erased right now. And what I'm going to do is take more of a gradient approach to this and use the selection tools. But what I'm going to do, hold on, I'm going to do darks last. I'm going to call these light blends in between. So it's nighttime, right? This is my night scene, and I'm dealing with light, and I'm doing blending, so that way I can control it. The reason why is I want to be able to adjust this light source itself anytime I want, and I can't do that if I have all the blends in there. So what I'm going to do now for the blends is I'm going to come in here, because you have a lot of hard edges. I'm going to take your polygon lasso. So I'm going to take here, go to here, go across to here, select that. What I like to do is make a bunch of selections first and then come in and sort of get the light spreading across it. And I'm not being as tedious on this as if you might be. I'm just going to select some edges. Oops. Actually, I decided to add just the rest of these. There. Okay, so let's start there. Put a little edge there. Okay, and what about over here? That's smack dab under the light, right? Okay. Where else? That side, this top plane is going to be hit here. Okay, and it's going to come down here. I'm going to rough this, all right, Michelle? That's just like a comp. I'm going to say from that, there's going to be from that table, you're going to have a shadow. It's going to come out to about there. Oops, not like that. That's what I hate about the dang lasso tool. Did it again. Sorry, I should have just paused the video. But I think this will be enough to give me a base idea of what my light's going to be looking like. There. Okay, so I have these little areas selected, and don't forget I have the table itself, right? So I'm basically going to hit hide right now. I have that light blend layer that I already created. I'm taking my soft fuzzy brush. I'm just going to come in here and go over a couple spots. See, and I'm just going to brighten up where that light is going to be pretty bright right in here, right? So I'm going to brighten up part of that light hitting, and then that light's going to start to fade off this way. It's going to fade this way. It's going to hit this lower little segment down here, and then it's going to fade off this way. I'm going to have a nice little gradient coming through there. Now, as that light spreads, remember, it's going to change in its intensity. So if it was there, as it gets down a little bit more, it's going to get a little bit duller, maybe to about here. But it still is going to have part of the property of changing the ground. Does that make sense? It'll still have its color, it'll have its intensity to affect what's casting down below. So see how that feels a little duller now to me than does the top light? I want that to happen because when light transforms and moves, it is delineating and it's losing part of its power. And you know what stuck with me is I watched this video by Jeremy Vickery, and I remember going, Jeremy Vickery is a guy that was working at Pixar that was in charge of lighting. And one of the things he talked about, and I went and looked this up, he was totally right. He goes, white. There's only really one use of white. It is a color at its brightest light. And he showed an example of a Christmas bulb. So if you look at Christmas bulbs on a tree, and if it's green or red, it's a reddish tint coming from the light because it's a red light. But if you go look at the very brightest sparkle on there, it's white. So that means that's the spectrum, which, not to dive into this, but I had to cover it really quick because some of you don't know what the heck I'm talking about. I'm talking about this right here, color spectrum. Okay, so if you look at, we're dealing with a blue light right now, right? So if we're with a blue light at its brightest, it's white, and then it goes into this blue. What happens if we go across the spectrum? The blue starts to transfer into what? Green. As it gets darker, it starts to dull off a little bit, okay? In the morning light, when we saw that bright white light coming through the window, it's bright white, but then it goes into a yellow, like here, and then that yellow goes into a yellow-orange. Boom, okay? So one thing about color spectrums that you always have to ask yourself, it's a change in the way that color spreads. When's a time that we always see really cool color spreads? Okay? Another time is when we see color changing drastically in the evening time. When the light's first coming up, like in the morning or in the evening, the light is dissipating and dropping behind an object. It's going right across. You know, we see these beautiful sunsets in California, yellow to orange, orange to red, and then red crosses back over the spectrum, back to like a red-violet, right? So that's important to think about that spectrum. So here, as I come in and do this, punching up some of this, okay, which I realize I have to end this demo in just a minute. I didn't mean to go so long, but I'm just giving you an idea of where to start. Now, I want to come back over here and I want to raise to that blue again, where it was intense, because right here on this floor, I'm going to try to punch this up a little bit. Why? I'm closer right here to part of my light source, right? So I'm going to have that a little bit more intensified in part of my light blend, okay? So that feels pretty cool. And I forgot I did this up here. Look, right in here, I'm going to have reflective light coming up here, hitting some of this and fading its way up, right? And that's, because what's going to happen, that light's going to bounce and it's going to hit those edges, right? So I could probably even come in here, put a couple little highlights in here on my selection, but then when it fades up here, it's going to go back to its local color again and actually get darker because it's in the tint of what's happening. So I'm good. Does that make sense? I'm going to see a gradient of, yeah, that's the light bouncing and hitting up here, and then as it spreads across, it's going to its local color, and then it's going to be influenced by its shadow, which, let me hit deselect. I had these little areas here. I forgot. Let me get those in there. That in there, a little bit of that over there. Okay, now real quick, I know we're running out. We're down to like minutes here. Okay. Uh-oh. Oh, no. I don't want effect. I hit a weird marker. Hold on a minute. Okay, sorry. Something happened. I hit a button here. I knew I was... No, I got some weird effect marker thing in Camtasia. So let's just go back and let's go back to Photoshop. Okay, so what I'm going to do really quick here in the shadows... See, I got the effect thing in Camtasia. Let me stop real quick because I have no idea what effects I'm putting in the middle of this piece right now. All right, sorry about that, guys. I had to pause for a minute because I had a little bit of a hiccup with something happened, and I was getting effects keys being put in there. So anyway, so right now, I mean, I'm trying to limit this demo here. So what I'm going to do is just quickly, I want to throw in a little bit of shadow because all I've been doing, if you look, is pretty much highlights and reflective light. So when I go back into part of my darks, let's come over here. I'm going to switch. I'm going to take like this sort of dark, sort of navy blue, and I'm just going to think to myself right now, this wall and under the chair, it's all pretty much in its local value. There's no gradients happening, and there's going to be little bits of gradients. Now, I have a friend of mine that likes to work with gradients and erase them, but in this case, you know, you could go in here and do some of that. But what I'm going to do is just to save myself a little bit of time, is I just like to target one little area and go, hey, under this desk, I'm going to have some little gradient pockets in there, you know, on the back of this box. So I just take my brush really lightly and I just go across and make sure everything's deselected. And I like to just paint some of that in myself and take a look at it and see how it's coming together. Okay, so I'm going to come in part of that chair and just try to show just a little bit of spread, you know, a little bit of gradients, a little bit darker come from that corner. We have a little bit of that shadow that's under there. How about under right here? Get that spread out definitely under right there. Now I do have a little bit of the light overlapping part of this. It could battle that, but that's okay for right now. Okay, nice little soft, subtle gradients of color. Okay, actually, what am I doing? I don't know why I'm doing that on the corner there. That light's going to hit, and it's not going to be that have that value there. But up here, definitely. So look, I can come up here, and I'm going to make my brush a little larger. I'm going to come down here and be like, boom, and get some nice, soft gradient coming through part of that ceiling. Okay, just like that. I'm going to try to get some of that to just fade down very lightly, you know, soft, especially back here. I mean, that's still a corner that's not facing that light. That should be a little bit darker back there with a little bit of a shadow. Okay, and then I even have part of the tops up here, and then even thinking about even back here in this corner, how stuff's going to fade forward. Okay. Now it doesn't look like much, but it does add up. And here's the great thing with Photoshop is I can turn this on and off, and you can see the difference there, right? So really coming in here and just softly and subtly adding in painting, especially under here. Look at this. I'm going to have little shadows of gradients coming up where the light's hitting from underneath. And some of these, right? Okay. And it's going to be a little bit darker up on the topper ones because they're a little further away from the light source, right? There's even going to be a little bit of a cast shadow probably coming off from this element on the wall. And I could do that really nice. I'm just doing it real fast. Think of this as my comp. I'm zoomed into my comp. I'm doing a 20-minute study, and I'm not going to spend hours and hours of rendering because I even noticed over here I got a little bit too much overspray right there. And that's because of the brush I'm using, soft fuzzy brush, which is fine for right now. Actually, go back. I erased a little bit too much there. Erase 0, 4. Make it a little bit smaller. There, dull that down a little. Okay. So, what about in here? Underneath, right? It's going to be a little bit cooler value under there coming forward as we get to that light. That's shadow. About back down in here. Okay, so you can see I have all these little pockets. So I just wanted to throw some of these values in really quick to get a better idea of how they're starting to work. Okay. Even more the side of this chair. So what I like to do is from this point is I like to think about, I just draw on top of it and think of, you know, what Phil always calls like a paint by numbers. And I hate using that terminology, but it makes sense to me. And hopefully it does to you too. So the light's coming down here. So I'm going to draw on top of it. If I have light that's coming this way, boom, that light's going to come here. What's going to happen? Bam, that light's going to bounce up here. The light's coming down into right here. Okay, that light's coming down this way. Okay, so I even have light that's going to hit here and bounce up. So now I can get, remember, look at the position of the light source. If I draw a line down, it's right here, it's right there. So that means this part right here is going to be hit a little bit hotter, and that part's going to be hit a little bit hotter. So that would be a next area I'd put some lights, okay? But what about this light coming back over here in this direction? I'm going to have some highlights over here. I'm going to have some on these edges, okay? I'm going to come in here. I'm going to have some light up in here. I'm going to have a little bit of light hitting part of these edges here, and then it's going to gradate and fade off. It's going to be little delineations of light hitting part of there. So you see what I'm going for. And the other thing that I haven't even done yet, it is nighttime, right? So let's make this look more reflective of nighttime outside. So I'm just going to quickly select this. And I'm going to just darken it to... Now I'm not going to go black because we never really have pure black night. We tend to have variants of color and dark imagery, but I mean, I don't know. I say that, and I've been out in the middle of the desert before camping, and it's like pure black when you walk away from the campsite. So what I'm going to do with that is take this, put another layer up above on my darks right here. I'm going to label it night, and I misspelled it, but that's okay. I don't care. I'm trying to go real fast here. I'm going to drop down over darks, and I'm going to switch. I'm going to grab a blue somewhere about here, and I'm going to edit and fill that bad boy really quick. Okay, and it's super bright right now. So what I'm going to do is I just like to fill it to look at the color, and then I can adjust it in here, and if I want to lighten it a little bit. So to me, something about that would be pretty close. Then I'm going to drop the opacity down just a teeny bit here. So that might be part of my night up there. Remember, I'm going to have a gradient going outside of that, right? Obviously, because it's going to be nighttime. So if I have lights outside that might be warm, so if I were to switch to like a yellow light right now and come over here, I might take part of my light and say, hey, outside there's a street light on. So out here I might have, oops, not that bright, really soft yellow light coming up from the ground, okay? Outside, you know, the street lights are on. There's a neighbor house out there. What about if I had some stars? So that's nighttime, right? So I come over here. We're going to go to a bright white. Okay, I'm going to put this layer up, and when I do this, where's my brush? There it is. So my stars, I'm going to put on a separate layer. So if it's too bright, oh, it's that weird effect thing. Hold on. Which is sort of cool. Let's see what happens. Boom. There, maybe it's a little bit of nighttime. Okay, deselect. So I did that on a separate layer so I could adjust it. So obviously, I'm also changing my outside light conditions. Okay, but let's just take a look at where we are and stop for a minute. So I'm going to drop this down here. What's this layer I had? There. Put this together. Let me merge these two. These are going to go together with darks. Okay. I had my highlights here. So I was just drawing, talking about other places. Right now I focus most of my energy here in the middle, but I still have all this area to the left, all this area to the right. I have little highlights on the floor. I have all kinds of areas that are going to be affected by this night light being on. I haven't rendered that. So this is the difference to me between doing a quick demo that's looking at the times of day and branching out those times of day. Look, I haven't even talked, as far as the light goes, look, I haven't even talked about light bouncing up into this other area. Because look, after the light comes down here, brushes. After that light comes back, look, I'm going to have light that comes back up in here. I'm going to have a little bit of highlights under those beams are going to delineate. I'm going to have some highlights there that are going to drop off. I might have a little bit more darker going back this way with a gradient, right? So I have those beams. I have this whole area here. I have part of that area. There might be some shadows coming off here. I'm going to have some darks back in here. Okay, all those little elements that add to my scene that make my scene look like it's in color. Okay, I mean, matching the nighttime point of view is what I'm trying to say here. Okay, and what do you know? Look at that. Now I have to hit Command Z because I'm too busy lecturing and I didn't pay attention and I accidentally drew over my night lights. Okay, so real quick, I'm going to merge all this together. And hold on. I need to undo that other red. There we go. There, put that back on the top. Okay. So if I merge all this together, like to flatten things and take a look at it. Okay. There's my night scene right now. And look at where my morning scene was. Okay. There's my night scene. And most importantly, that was where I started. That was my local color. Okay. So this is how I like to work. It's an approach for me. Everybody's different. Sometimes we get people that are like the you know, they're like the color National Guard Nazis or whatever, and they want to tell you how to do something. This is how I like to work, and for me, I understand it this way, and for me, this is an easy way to come in here and do comps. So I can look at this and I can show a client, hey, that's my local color, here's my morning scene, here's my evening scene. I could go back and do a cloudy scene and so on. So I could spend a lot more time and I could end up with results like this, like I had morning, late, evening, natural light. So for me, the way color works is I like to think about the local color of an object. I like to think about the surroundings of the room matching the time of day. And then the next for me is the light. What is the light coming in the location? What is the intensity of that light? Is it a cool light? Is it a warm light? Is it being affected by clouds, cloudy day, so on? And then I go back into all that and I can make all these adjustments according. Okay, to me, that's a huge step into the right direction, really getting a good understanding on how to manipulate your environments into color and be better at painting with color. All right, thanks guys for watching. Take care and have a good one. Bye-bye.